It was pretty innocent. It was a small and soft toy. Kangaroo, the ones young kids cuddle in bed. This one was a little bit different. When I clapped or made vibrations by stamping my feet, a voice box inside the toy would make a laughing noise. I thought it was funny at first as Louise put it on the floor and clapped over its head. "So how much did you pay for this one?" I asked my sister. $20 from the market," my sister panted. After all the laughing, I never suspected anything out of the ordinary would happen. It was in the school holidays. I was pretty bummed out as it was, right in the transition from summer to autumn, which meant horrible weather. I live in Australia. I spent most of my day inside, messing around on my computer or feeding my snakes. That night I picked myself up and moved towards my bedroom. I quickly fell asleep. At around 2 in the morning, a great flash illuminated the room, and I heard a smash. I looked to the corner of my room to see my camera lying on the floor in a million pieces, and the soft toy kangaroo sitting in the spot where my camera should have been. A shiver went up my spine as my stomach fell. I slowly picked up my camera. Wasn't it in its bag? I looked up at the kangaroo. It was sitting on the camera case. I decided the next day to see if I could still remove the SD card from my camera and save all the photos I have taken over the year. My parents weren't too happy as I showed them what was once my camera, and apparently Louise's toy did it. Was not a reasonable explanation. Anyway, I removed the SD card, inserted it into the computer, and started uploading all the images. I knew it would take a few hours, so I went out with some mates so I wouldn't be waiting around. We had a pretty good time. In fact, I think I forgot all about it. I got back to my computer, and what I found made me vomit. The last image taken was a JPEG image of the kangaroo toy, yet it was disturbingly real and different. Its eyes were pure black. Blood poured out of its eyes, and it was smiling with blood-stained teeth. I was really scared. I showed my dad, and he dismissed it as Louise having a little prank. He reassured me that he would talk to her the next day. I felt a lot better, until I realized she was 11. I didn't know how to use Photoshop when I was 11. I decided to save the image so I could show it to my friends. It was gone. Wiped off the computer. The image was gone. I was shitting bricks all night, hoping the kangaroo wouldn't try to get me. I fell asleep and woke up without anything happening in the night. I was wrong. I usually check my pythons every morning just to see how they are getting on. In the enclosure closest to the door is my favorite black-headed python. I lifted her hide box and I almost cried. She was stone dead, blood slowly trickling out of the cavities in her body. I was devastated. That thing cost me almost $600. I looked around to see if anything was different in the room. I heard a laugh, the mechanical laugh of the kangaroo. My skin prickled with goosebumps. It was sitting in the chair opposite where the dead snake was lying. My body almost shut down, just glued to the floor with fear. It started laughing again, but it didn't sound as mechanical, more real, more human. I knew it had to be stopped. I didn't care if Louise was upset if I ruined her toy. It had done too much. I came at it with a pair of scissors. The laughing didn't stop. I stuck the blades of the scissors and ripped stuffing out of the stuffed animal. The laughs got louder and louder. It stank like a dead animal as I kept ripping the stuffing from it. Its eyes started bleeding and its lips curled into a smile. It kept laughing. I finally found the sound box within it, but the laughing wasn't coming from it. What the fuck? I ripped the small black box open to find a beating heart. The laughing stopped. "Hurry, Darian, it's almost on," Eden shouts at me from the other room. "What's almost on?" I ask. walking into the room. Eden and Red are sitting on the couch in front of the television. Kangaroo Court, Red replies. The new game show that's sweeping the nation. Kangaroo Court, I ask, sitting on the couch with them. Is that a joke? Shush, Eden retorts. It's on. The television is showing a judge sitting at his bench. He's wearing a little pin with a cartoon kangaroo on it. Welcome to Kangaroo Court, the judge says, where the punishment fits the crime. There's a long line of prisoners waiting for their turn to talk at the witness stand. The judge beckons one forward. Prisoner 1, you stand accused of arson. How do you plead? The judge demands. Arson? What the hell? I don't know what you're talking about, the prisoner replies. Where am I? The judge ignores prisoner 1. Prisoner 1, you're clearly guilty. I can tell. Your sentence is to be burned alive. A wall opens up and a turret sticks out of it. The turret launches a jet of fire at prisoner 1, immolating him. He falls to the ground, thrashing and shrieking. His clothes burn off, then his skin. Soon there's nothing left of him but a charred corpse. The floor beneath him opens up, dropping him to who knows where. Next defendant, the judge shouts. What the hell is this? I demand. What in God's name are we watching? Shush, Eden retorts. The judge is talking to prisoner 2. Prisoner 2, the judge says, you stand accused of murder. How do you plead? Not guilty, prisoner 2 begs. You are clearly guilty, the judge retorts. Your sentence is the gorilla treatment. What? Prisoner 2 gasps. A cage falls from the ceiling and lands next to prisoner 2. There's a crazy gorilla inside. The gorilla reaches out of his cage, grabs prisoner 2, and tries to pull him inside. Prisoner 2 is screaming and begging for his life. The gorilla pulls harder, tearing his arm off, and the man falls to the ground, bleeding out. The gorilla takes a few big bites of his victim's arm, then drops it and reaches for the prisoner. He grabs him and tries to pull him into the cage. This time the prisoner's neck breaks. The gorilla pulls him inside his cage and tears him to pieces, then starts eating him. The cage rises back into the ceiling, taking the gorilla and his prize with him. Next victim, the judge shouts. I watch on, aghast. Eden and Red don't notice how uncomfortable I am. Clearly they're having the time of their lives. It keeps going on and on like that for hours. I witness one atrocity after another, each one worse than the last. A man is fed to piranhas. A woman is tied up and thrown into a lake to drown. 2 men are boiled alive at once. A guy gets dumped in a vat of molten steel. Another woman is crushed in an industrial vice. A man is given 2 options, head or feet. The man winces, obviously thinking he has to choose between losing his head or his feet. Feet, he says cautiously. Of course, he's wrong. You got it, the judge says. All right, boys, you heard the man. Put him in the industrial shredder feet first. The carnage continues. It's horrible to watch, but the screams are the worst part. After watching the show for a while, I come to an uneasy conclusion. None of these guys seem guilty. In fact, the judge isn't even bothering with evidence. He's just killing them for the sake of killing them. What kind of sick world am I living in? Who would think this is entertainment? And our final contestant for today, the judge cracks. Please welcome prisoner 100. Prisoner 100 is called to the witness stand. Prisoner 100, the judge says, leaning across his bench. You stand accused of raping and murdering 2 innocent little girls. How do you plead? Prisoner 100 spits at the judge. What is that, a joke? Does it matter how I plead? You'll just kill me just the same as you killed the other 99. I'll have no part in this debauchery, you monster. You might think this violence is all just a fun game, but it's not. These were people, you brute. He gestures around the room. There are hyenas still gnawing on one of the corpses, and a pool with a shark inside, eating another victim. Everyone you just killed was a person, you bastard. Prisoner 100 says. They had families, lives, you bastard. What's with the fun and games? What's with the show trials? Just own up. Admit you like killing people. Admit it. Admit it. The judge's smile has slowly turned into a stern frown. He sits up straight on his bench. Prisoner 100. You have been found innocent. Prisoner 100 can't hide his disbelief. What? You heard me, the judge replies. You are free to go. Prisoner 100 blinks up at the judge. The judge stares back. Finally, the prisoner turns and starts to walk away. No, wait, the judge says. It slipped my mind. You're still wanted for contempt of court. Your sentence, the degloving chamber. The floor beneath the prisoner's feet opens up. He falls into whatever the degloving chamber is. A piercing shriek rises out of the pit. A second later, the floor closes back up again. And that's all for now, the judge says, smiling at the camera. Come back next week for more Kangaroo Court. I'm your host, Judge K, and it's been a pleasure to dispense justice today. The show ends. Eden and Red are speechless. They both sigh. Wow, another great episode, Eden says. Wasn't that great, Darian? I don't respond. Darian, you good, bro? Red asks. I still don't respond. Hey, come on, Darian, Eden says. It's just a show, man. Don't be like that. What if we wound up on that show? I ask. Eden and Red blink at each other. Then they both burst into laughter. Get out, Eden laughs. Us? Seriously, Darian, get out. Oh, that's a good one, Darian, Red says, wiping away a tear. You've got me in stitches. No, really. You had me going for a second there. I ignore them. The show might be over, but I'm still replaying it in my mind. I heard my husband pull in at around 5 p.m., but it wasn't for another 10 minutes that I knew something was off. He had been sitting in his car that entire time without moving. We don't have the space for 2 cars in our driveway, so whoever gets home last has to park out on the street. Usually he walks in immediately with some hot and exciting piece of gossip from the office. Today was not that day. As I walked out, I noticed the windshield was badly cracked. The visibility through the glass was so awful, I don't even know how he managed to drive home. It was quite an annoying sight, given we'd just paid a fortune on the last service. He didn't even acknowledge me as I approached the car. His eyes were laser-focused on the rear vision mirror. I tried to gauge what he was looking at and glanced up the neighborhood. There was nothing out of the ordinary. It was a quiet one-way street. Cute weatherboard houses, freshly cut lawns, and a couple of shady gum trees that loomed over the neighborhood's cars. Exactly what we wanted. It seemed everyone else was inside, in a bid to get out of the relentless heat wave. I opened up the passenger door and sat beside him. What happened to the windshield? He sat in silence, gaze locked onto the mirror. His mouth barely moved. Kangaroo. My stomach lurched. Hitting a kangaroo can be a death sentence for a driver. It wasn't uncommon to see them in our suburb, as it fringes the rural bushland. But getting one on the road is still scary. I could make out the blooded point of impact in the glass. He was lucky to be unharmed. Holy shit, are you all right? I don't know. It was sweltering, and he didn't have the air conditioner on. He leant over and shut my door. His eyes remained fixed on the mirror. I wanted to ask what was going on, but then I caught a glimpse. In the rear vision mirror, an obscured person stood at the top of the street. I couldn't make out their silhouette due to the shade from the gum trees, but it definitely looked human. It stood completely still. Its presence filled my body with unbridled dread. I turned my head to get a better view through the rear window. The figure vanished. It had gone in less than a second. I wish that was the last time I ever saw it, but as I glanced back into the mirror, the figure returned. I snapped my head back to the window. It disappeared. It seemed this mysterious person was only visible through the mirror's reflection. I'd never seen anything like this, and thought the heat was making me hallucinate. David, what is that? I noticed my husband's breath had become quite shaky. He was terrified. I don't know, he whispered. Normally it would be comforting to know you weren't imagining such a thing. This confirmation was anything but. The figure began to step forward. Its movements were staggered as it dragged itself to the nearest car. It slowly reached out an arm and swung open the door. It seemed to be looking for something, unsatisfied with its results. It slammed the door and hurried to the next car in line. I think we should head inside. My husband pushed down the car door locks and looked at me with a finger over his lip. I have never seen him so scared. Small beads of sweat were streaking down his face and dripping off his chin. He shook his head and indicated for us to remain. I wanted to suggest that we drive away, turn on the engine, and never look back at that thing. However, facing the street's dead end made this option impossible. We would have to turn the car around and head straight for the figure if we were to leave. An easy escape wasn't factored in when we were initially drawn to this quiet street. We slowly slid down our chairs and watched as the figure opened and closed the neighborhood's cars, making its way up the street. It would appear to anyone watching without a mirror that the doors were moving on their own volition. Their metallic clunking rang out in a disjointed rhythm. My husband was really struggling. It seemed the stress of this ever-growing threat had caused him to repeat the only two phrases he had just uttered. Kangaroo, I don't know. Kangaroo, I don't know. The figure was far too close when I realized most of our neighbors would also have had their cars locked. It clearly didn't stop the thing. We should have gone inside. The figure's footsteps approached, scuffling along the tarmac. We were next. My husband covered his mouth with a trembling hand. There was complete silence as we held our breath. The locks popped up. The backseat door swung open, and we felt the weight of the figure enter. The vehicle wobbled and the back door closed. We were no longer alone. Something was breathing back there. It was a wheezy kind of breath followed by a slight gurgle, like a lung had been punctured. I had to look. I reached up to the rear vision mirror and angled it downwards. My husband stared at me with widened eyes, shocked at my curiosity. A part of me wished I hadn't done that. In the back seat was a bloodied man. He stared at me, eyes bulging in pain. He looked dead. I think he was dead. His entire face had been crushed, and his body was horribly disfigured. He held up a severely broken arm and pointed it towards himself before turning it to the damaged windshield. I followed his finger to the bloodied point of impact on the glass. I froze. I didn't want it to be true. The bloodied man fixed his gaze onto my husband's seat. My mouth was dry of any moisture, but my question still managed to scratch itself out. David, what happened with the windshield? Kangaroo, I don't know. Kangaroo, I don't know. As I closed the car door, I heard it lock behind me. Both my husband and the man were still inside. I don't know which one had put the locks back down, but I've decided it wasn't my fate to find out. I went back to the house and removed every single mirror we owned. I never saw either of them again. I've lived in the same house for 40 years. After Ralph passed, and I was left alone for the first time in 3 decades, I turned to my neighbors for comfort. They provided it in spades. I was honored and brought to tears by their kindness. Not too many places would make sure a lonely old man was taken care of. I'm surrounded by wonderful, beautiful people. I took on the role of a grandfather to some of the neighborhood children. I was more than happy to babysit. Ralph and I always wanted to adopt, but it wasn't permitted in our state. So having the opportunity to be a formative figure in the lives of these children was a great privilege. It made me feel like I was getting another chance to do everything that had been denied to me. I wish Ralph could have been here to take part. Still, I know he's watching with the same love and pride he expressed every day he was alive. One girl, Madison, formed a particularly strong connection to me. Her father was out of the picture. Her mum, Helen, who was forced to work full-time, was rarely home during the day. Helen had always been the most supportive and loving of the neighbors after Ralph's death, so when I had the opportunity to help with Madison and watch her during the workday, I was more than willing. I started looking after Madison soon after her 10th birthday. She fell in love with the collection of toy kangaroos all over the house. Ralph was born in Australia, and I always used to call him my little Roo, especially when he got excited and his accent became more pronounced. On his birthdays, I'd give him some type of kangaroo toy. They'd been gathering dust after his passing, and I was glad Madison could give them some life again. Years passed and Madison started to grow up. I worried she was becoming depressed. She never had very many friends in school. She'd come straight over when her day was done and do her homework while waiting for her mum. Her mood was less bubbly than I'd remembered. Part of it, I'm sure, was her age. Adolescence is tough for everyone, let alone someone with a difficult family life like Madison. Still, I worried about her. She was perfectly nice to me and was never rude or disrespectful, but she'd withdrawn. She didn't watch television with me anymore. After her homework either. She'd just sit on the floor in her kangaroo pajamas, which were far too small for her at that point, playing with Ralph's figurines, just like she did when she was little. When Madison was 16, she got a boyfriend. Her first one, as far as I knew. I didn't like him at all. He was your typical teenage, tough guy type, a chain-smoking, foul-mouthed loser. There wasn't anything I could do about it, though. Madison wouldn't bring him over, and I think she sensed I didn't approve, but it wasn't my business. I told myself years before that such situations were purely between Madison and her mother. Only if I felt like Madison was in danger would I interfere. Madison spent more and more time with the boyfriend, and less with me. The house grew quiet again. The other children I'd taken care of had grown old enough to watch themselves. Their parents stopped by every so often for coffee, but my general person-to-person interaction was far less than I'd previously enjoyed. I was lonely. One night, Helen came to me in a panic. Apparently, Madison had admitted to using drugs. Helen had no idea what kind or anything like that, but she was terrified for her daughter's safety. I tried to reassure her that there had to be something the school could do, but that was when she told me the other half of the story. Madison was pregnant. This floored me. I'd seen Madison around town over the last few months, and I'd noticed she'd gained some weight, but it never occurred to me she might be pregnant. Now her drug use was even more worrying. We tried to figure out a plan together, and the only thing we could agree on was that the school had to know. Even though the local school system wasn't the best, they had to have some resources dedicated to problems like these. The school did nothing. Madison's reckless behavior continued. Helen was too terrified to notify the police because she feared she'd be put in a foster home. I too was clueless. Time went by, and the rare times I'd see Madison in town, she'd be stumbling around drunkenly with her idiot boyfriend. Her protrusive belly and obscenity against the background of her intoxication. On a late afternoon in February, I was leaving the supermarket when Madison spotted me from across the parking lot. She wasn't with her boyfriend, thankfully. She rushed up to me and gave me a big hug. She didn't seem drunk, but she had to have been on something. Her pupils were dilated and her words were slurred as she said how much she missed me. Then she asked if she could come over later to see the kangaroos. I told her that would be wonderful and that I missed her. At some point around 7, Madison came over. I ushered her in quickly. It was way below freezing outside and she looked ill. I could tell she was high. She shuffled in without saying hello and went to the mantel where the kangaroos stood. In a sing-song, childish voice, she talked to them. When she was 11, I thought that type of thing was cute. Now, though, knowing she was under the influence of something that was poisoning not only her but the baby as well, it was far less adorable. I walked up to her and asked if I could take her coat, and if she'd like some tea and chocolate cake. She didn't reply. She just kept talking to the kangaroos. I sighed and sat down on the couch, waiting for her to either snap out of it and talk to me, or leave, and hopefully go home to her mum. Madison went down the line of the kangaroo toys on the mantel, saying "I love you" to each one. Then she walked back, doing the same thing in reverse order. Then she faced me. "I love you too, Michael," she cooed, a thin smile cracking her pale face. "But you know what? I love Rue most of all." Madison dropped her heavy coat to the floor and I screamed. A gaping wound had been carved across the top of her belly. The blue head and chest and right arm of her baby stuck out from the opening. "Look at little Rue," she said weakly. "Such a good little Rue." Madison tried to hop toward me, mimicking the kangaroo. The limp head and arm of the child flopped back and forth with the movement. Sweet little Rue, all warm and safe in his pouch. If you liked the story, please leave a subscription. Comment what video you would like to see next and share the video. It means a lot to me. We'll hear from each other soon.